Are you excited about the idea of weaponizing thrusters, melting through enemy armor, cutting down enemy space engineers? Well, you're in the right place. Today we're going to conduct some thruster testing and see how powerful they are. The results might surprise you. So let's start the testing. Now for the first test we need to see how much damage each of these thrusters is doing, and while we're doing this we can work out at what distance they start to damage the player. So let's dive into the testing. We're starting with the small grid small iron thruster, and this outputs a really measly 1 to 2 damage every second or so, and it seems to be selecting what damage it does at random. But I have to get really close, and you can see as we head over to this small grid large iron thruster, this does slightly more damage at -7 or -6, and it seems to be random every second or so. Still not doing enough damage to really weaponize or scare a player away from it. Now we've got the small grid large atmospheric thruster that surprisingly does 1 more damage point than the iron thruster, but look how close I have to get at the character. So you can see a -7, -8 to my damage scale, and yes, this would tick away over time, but really not that scary. And we've got the small atmospheric thruster here that does 1 to 2, just like the iron thruster. So really not too scary, nothing we can really weaponize so far. But let's have a look at the hydrogen thrusters. Now we've got the small hydrogen thruster for the small grid, and this one does 8 damage, possibly 9 if you're in the lucky sort of situation, but you can see it's just selecting them at random. It doesn't really matter how close or far I am away from the thruster, it just selects the number at random and issues it to me in damage. Well, the small grid large hydrogen thruster does a massive 28, so this could be a possible weaponized scenario. We could weaponize this, but let's have a look over at the large grid. You can see this small iron does 40 to 41. This large grid iron thruster is devastating at -72. So these are big thrusters, but they could be options. And you can see we've got this large grid atmospheric thruster that's damaging the player from quite some distance away, taking my health right down there to 5, so 95, -95 health. That is mad. And then finally we have the small atmospheric thruster on the large scale that does a nice -30, -31. So we've got some interesting things here. The atmospheric thruster on the large scale could be a possible solution, but we've got hydrogen as well. So as we get closer to this hydrogen thruster, just as we touch the flame, we were on a lovely -40, and then we're on another -41. So these will kill the player extremely fast, but the large hydrogen thruster does over 100 damage, and it's got quite a bit of range on it. As soon as I touch that flame, I am going to be vaporized or instantly killed. So that is a possible option for a cutter. So there's two things that a lot of people are quite curious about. The first one is the closer you are to a thruster, does the more damage happen to you? And the second one is if I turn the power or the thrust of a thruster down, does it do less damage? So we've got this large atmospheric thruster. Currently we're on 6.3. That was doing 95 damage to us. So we're going to half that. We're going to put it on 2.8. So having a look at 2.8, I'm going to walk into the thruster and we're looking for 95 damage. So there we go, 95 damage. Changing the thrust does not affect how much damage the thruster will do to us. Now, another common myth about the thrusters is that if we are closer, it'll damage you faster. And that is simply not the case. So if we're here, it'll damage us at the exact same amount of time, as you can see. So the thruster will do the exact same amount of damage. It doesn't matter how close or far away I am from it. So as I'm just coming into this thrust bubble here, you'll see that it does the exact same sort of damage to me. So let's talk about block damage, and the first thing I want you to know is how far do we have to play with. When it comes to building internal thrusters inside a ship, this is extremely useful because it makes a ship look nice and aesthetically pleasing from the outside when there isn't thrusters sticking out, and it also protects the ship a lot better. So when it comes to iron, you're pretty safe with having a 1 block clearance. When it comes to atmospheric though, I recommend a 2 to 3 block clearance, or you'll simply melt the blocks away. And when it comes to hydrogen, the small one you can get away with about 3 blocks of clearance, where the larger one you really need over 6. With these larger thrusters as well, it's important to understand that they shoot out a sort of 6 block wide cone, or a cone the same size as the block out the back. So if you place a block like this, you're going to get it melted, where with the smaller narrow Wanna blocks, they shoot a centralized cone, so you can get away with having blocks that have chambers around them as well. So let's start with our first little bit of machinery. Now this is a cutter, so we're going to see if we can cut a square within this metal block. It might work, it might not. We'll just have to kind of see what we've got. So let's activate our thruster. So thruster is starting to cut. Okay, it has cut its first bit. Let's cut in that direction. Okay, we'll have to retract back, burn them blocks a little bit better. Go forward like so. Okay, so we've cut that line of blocks. Let's see if we can retract that one and cut across. So we're aiming to get a square cut out of the middle there. Like, I don't know if this would be super useful for anything. Maybe you could use it to board a ship, but not many ships are made of light armor. So we need to reverse it back over that bit a bit more. Cut through that bit of armor. Oh, it's taking its time cutting through there. we need one of them big thrusters. One of them big thrusters would put an hole in this probably straight away, but they just require so much to be used. Okay, there we go. We have got a cut on that side of the square. So let's retract it all the way back this way, and then we'll use the other piston and cut down like so. We're going to end up with quite a small square here. Okay, retract back. We're slowly melting away at that armor. Okay, lovely. Not super practical. We're not in the practical point of this testing just yet. And we'll bring it across. Okay, and bring it back. Right, we are cutting. We've nearly got a square. Nearly got a square. Would it be quicker with a grinder? Yes, definitely. Okay. Oh, there we go. We have cut a square out. So if that was the side of a small ship, we would have breached in, I guess. And we probably could enter through there with the character. That's cool. Yeah, so that a cool little proof of concept, but we need to expand on this a bit further. Now, like I said, you could do this with the large thrusters as well on large armor, and you can breach in and make a significant hole, but it would be a bit of a challenge. Perhaps you could put it on the front of a breaching warhead, so you could thrust just before you breach, or you could have it on a small vehicle and you could enter up to the side of a structure and burn a hole in. We'll have to compare if it's as quick as a grinder. Now, the only reason you'd want to use the hydrogen thruster as a cutter if it was better than the grinder. So let's see if it's better than the grinder. I've set up this quick test. So the grinder is set up on a timer block and the hydrogen thruster is set up on a timer block, and we're going to see which one cuts first. So as you can see, it's neck to neck to start with, and it looks like the grinder is breaking through, and it's through. The hydrogen thruster is still cutting, and it's still got a long way to go as well. So for the moment, the thruster really isn't a breaching tool. It's just something fancy that you can use to melt your opponents. So talking about melting your opponents and killing Space Engineers characters quickly, let's have a look at some traps for that too. Now, if you're like me, you've been building trap corridors for quite some time. It's a great way of defending your base, and it's an easy way of taking out grinders or other attackers. So having something set up like this that forces them into the direction of thrust is great. You can do the same with welders, of course, and the bonus of welders is they actually fix up rather than destroy your base like the thrusters. But you can have someone fall into a thruster pit and have it a bit more dramatic, I guess. So as we come over here, we're going to activate our control panel. We're simply just going to switch all our thrusters on, and you'll see that they are thrusting very hot through there. If we switch that on with anyone in that passageway, they are not making it through. Now, this is something to consider though. You see how the thrusters has actually cut out. We have used up all our hydrogen supplies. So having something like this in your base is good, but think about it. If your ships have tanks and other supplies on them and you activate a defensive system like this, you're going to suck all the supplies, all the hydrogen out of them to use this defensive system. So make sure you have it perhaps on another loop, or so it can't pull that hydrogen out of the tanks of your ship and whatnot, because it is a very quick way of draining your hydrogen. You've only got a few seconds of sort of burn before it's going to need to replenish that tank, or of course you could have more tanks. So for my final little trap, I've probably given you a good idea of what you can do with this thruster and how it affects and damages other blocks. Well, you can set yourself a little ramp trap like this, the classic Viet Cong roll your barrels down a hill and blow some things up. So let's activate these thrusters, and we're going to cut through a weakened armor block. But when I say weakened, you've got to make sure you've still got enough power in the thruster. So it's broken, tilts forward, and it blows everything up. They were supposed to roll down, but the explosive barrels are clearly a little bit too volatile for that. Maybe set them on timers or something and then release them and have them roll down. Now, I also did try to make this cutter on a larger scale. I even attempted to focus 4 or 5 beams all to one point, but it didn't really work too well. The thrust needed to be offset some way. I tried putting a thruster on the top, but it didn't work. It was just too unstable on them pistons. If there was some way of stabilizing it, we could build a cutter, but the practicality of some sort of cutter like that just doesn't seem very realistic. So that brings us back to the drawing board. So that's our look today at thrusters, playing around with a melting. Hopefully I've given you some fun ideas. Let me know in the comment section if you'd like me to revisit the thruster sort of melting idea and see what else we could do with it.